Daniel trudged back to his property, the squeak of his boots against packed snow matching the grinding of his teeth. In his 15 years as an architect, he'd dealt with unreasonable clients, impossible deadlines, and bureaucratic nightmares. But nothing had prepared him for the territorial warfare of suburban living. Inside his home, Daniel shrugged off his snow-crusted coat and pulled up the doorbell footage again. The evidence was clear. Marilyn had not only directed the snow removal service to push snow onto his property, but had specifically pointed to his freshly shoveled driveway with a look of smug satisfaction. It wasn't negligence, it was intentional. Unbelievable, he muttered, forwarding the video to his sister. First week in my dream home, and I've already got an enemy. His phone buzzed almost immediately. Welcome to neighborhood politics, his sister replied. Mom and Dad dealt with similar stuff in their development. Document everything. Daniel had chosen this neighborhood specifically for its character and community feel. During his house hunting visits, he'd been charmed by the mix of well-preserved historic homes and thoughtful modern renovations. The real estate agent had mentioned the active neighborhood association as a positive. They maintain high standards, which protects your investment. Nobody had mentioned that those high standards came with a self-appointed snow tyrant. After changing into dry clothes, Daniel pulled out the welcome packet he'd received upon closing. Inside was a glossy brochure featuring a smiling Marilyn Kensington on the first page. President, Maple Hill Neighborhood Association, read the caption beneath her photo. Her welcome letter was filled with phrases like preserving our unique character and maintaining the standards that make Maple Hill special. Flipping through the rules and regulations, Daniel's professional eye caught something interesting. The detailed specifications for everything from mailbox height to acceptable shades of exterior paint indicated someone with an obsessive attention to detail. As an architect, he could appreciate thoroughness, but this went beyond thorough into controlling. Just as he was about to close the packet, his doorbell rang. Outside stood a middle-aged man, with a snow shovel over his shoulder and a thermos in hand. Thought you might need this more than me, the man said, offering the thermos. Hot chocolate. My wife adds cinnamon. Family recipe. Thanks, Daniel said, genuinely touched by the gesture. I'm Daniel Foster. Just moved in last week. Tom Henderson from across the street. Saw what happened with your driveway. Maryland's special brand of welcome wagon. Daniel invited Tom in, and over steaming mugs of hot chocolate, learned more about his new nemesis. Marilyn Kensington, widow of a former town council member, had appointed herself neighborhood guardian 15 years ago. Her husband had apparently been the reasonable one, keeping her tendencies in check. Since his passing 5 years ago, her reign had become increasingly inflexible. She's not all bad, Tom said, surprising Daniel. When my wife was sick last year, Marilyn organized a meal train, and she single-handedly fought the city when they wanted to remove the historic street lamps. But she's territorial, and you bought the house she wanted her niece to get. What? Daniel nearly choked on his chocolate. Tom nodded. Marilyn's niece had made an offer. But yours was better. The previous owners were desperate to sell after their own run-ins with her. I think Marilyn assumed they'd give her family preferential treatment. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about snow, it was personal. Daniel was living in what Marilyn considered her niece's house. So I'm being punished for outbidding her family member? Marilyn plays the long game, Tom said with a knowing look. The Patels before you lasted 6 months. The family before them, maybe a year. She doesn't do anything explicitly against the rules. She helped write them, after all. She just makes life uncomfortable enough that people eventually sell. As Tom left, Daniel stood in his doorway, looking at his beautiful new home with fresh eyes. The dormered windows, the original woodwork he'd fallen in love with, the perfect northern exposure in what would become his home studio, all of it now shadowed by the knowledge that his neighbor expected him to fail and flee. He watched as Marilyn emerged from her house to inspect her immaculate walkway, catching his eye across the pristine snow between their properties. She gave him a thin smile before turning away. I don't scare easily, Marilyn, Daniel whispered to himself. And I don't give up on good design. whether it's buildings or boundaries. Daniel's research extended far beyond what most homeowners would consider reasonable. But then again, most homeowners weren't fighting a snow war with a neighborhood tyrant. After 3 consecutive nights of working until 2 a.m., he had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Marilyn Kensington that would make an FBI agent proud. Property records revealed she had purchased her home 32 years ago with her late husband, Richard, who had indeed served on the town council. Tax assessments showed her property was valued significantly higher than surrounding homes, partly due to improvements made over the years, but also because she had successfully appealed her neighbors' assessments multiple times, claiming their non-conforming modifications reduced area property values. Most interestingly, Daniel discovered that Marilyn had once been an administrative assistant at a civil engineering firm before retiring to become a full-time neighborhood watchdog. This explained her unusual familiarity with building codes and regulations, knowledge she wielded like a scalpel against her neighbors. "Know thy enemy," Daniel muttered, printing aerial views of their properties from different seasons. Winter photos clearly showed the snow displacement pattern from her property to his. Spring photos revealed something even more useful. Her property had minor drainage issues that she'd been managing by subtly altering the grading toward his land. Armed with this knowledge, Daniel reached out to Carlos, a former client who specialized in underground utility installation. "Let me get this straight," Carlos said over lunch near Daniel's office. "You want to install an invisible system that will redirect snow back to your neighbor's property without her knowing?" "Nothing illegal," Daniel clarified, "just ensuring that the natural flow of elements respects property boundaries. Her snow stays on her property, my driveway stays clear." Carlos laughed. "Man, I had clients try to weaponize drainage against neighbors, but never snow. This is some next-level suburban warfare. Can you help me or not?" Daniel asked, sliding a preliminary sketch across the table. Carlos studied the drawing. "This is actually brilliant. The heating elements in these decorative markers would prevent critical buildup at key points, and these contour modifications." He looked up at Daniel with newfound respect. "This would absolutely work, but it's going to be expensive and require permits." "I've already checked," Daniel replied, pulling out a folder. "As long as I classify it as erosion control and water management, which it technically is, I can get an expedited permit. The stone markers are pre-approved in the HOA guidelines as decorative elements consistent with neighborhood aesthetic." "You've really thought this through," Carlos said, impressed. "Architects don't just design buildings, we solve problems. This particular problem just happens to involve snow and a neighbor who picked the wrong profession to mess with." That weekend, Daniel began the visible portions of his plan, installing elegant stone markers along his driveway. When Marilyn inevitably appeared to inspect his work, he was prepared. "Those aren't in the approved landscaping plan," she said without greeting, a fresh clipboard in hand. Daniel smiled pleasantly. "Actually, they are. Stone markers under 18 inches in height, natural materials, earth tones." He handed her a printout of the relevant guidelines. Her guidelines, with the applicable section highlighted. "They're purely decorative." Marilyn frowned, clearly searching for a violation. "What's inside them?" "Just concrete for stability," Daniel lied smoothly. "I'd be happy to show you the permit if you'd like. City approved it last Tuesday." The mention of official city approval gave her pause. Marilyn's power came from the Neighborhood Association, but city permits trumped HOA rules, a hierarchy she understood well. "That won't be necessary," she said stiffly. "Just ensure they don't interfere with snow removal operations." "Oh, I can absolutely guarantee they won't interfere with proper snow management," Daniel replied, his face a mask of innocence. "In fact, I'm quite confident they'll improve it significantly." As Marilyn walked away, Daniel returned to his work, carefully concealing the heating elements within each marker and connecting them to the solar-powered system hidden in his garage. The underground portions would begin next week when Carlos's crew arrived, disguised as a standard landscaping team. Looking up, Daniel caught sight of Tom from across the street, giving him a subtle thumbs up. Word had spread about the architect who wouldn't back down, and neighbors were watching with a mixture of anxiety and hope. He nodded back, feeling the weight of more than just his own vendetta. He had inadvertently become a symbol of resistance in a neighborhood long controlled by Maryland's clipboard and rulebook. Daniel barely slept the night before the storm. The weather forecast had upgraded the snowpocalypse to a potential record breaker, with officials advising residents to prepare for power outages and road closures. For most Vermonters, this meant stocking up on essentials and hunkering down. For Daniel, it meant the ultimate test of his elaborate countermeasures. At 3 a.m., he found himself checking the connections to his heating elements one final time, using the beam of his flashlight to inspect each stone marker along his property line. The underground work had been completed 4 days earlier, Carlos and his crew working with remarkable efficiency to modify the terrain's subtle contours before the first snowflakes arrived. "This better work," he whispered, his breath visible in the frigid air as the first light flurries began to fall. By morning, Burlington had disappeared under nearly 2 feet of snow, with more still coming down. Daniel's power remained on, a small miracle, allowing him to brew a pot of strong coffee before settling into his observation post by the bay window. He'd set up a proper command center, laptop displaying data from the hidden temperature sensors, binoculars for detailed observation, and a camera with telephoto lens mounted on a tripod. His neighbor Tom texted, "Marilyn already called premium service. They're hitting her place first. ETA 30 minutes. Daniel replied with a thumbs-up emoji, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation that reminded him of project unveilings with difficult clients. He checked the heating elements, all functioning at optimal temperature, maintaining a steady 45 degrees along critical redirect points. The invisible channels Carlos had helped construct lay dormant beneath the pristine blanket of white, ready to guide any additional snow along their carefully engineered path. Right on schedule, the premium snow removal service arrived, their truck equipped with an industrial-grade snowblower and plow attachment that likely cost more than some cars. Daniel recognized the crew from previous visits, 2 men who seemed to approach Marilyn's property with a combination of deference and dread. Through his binoculars, he could see Marilyn emerge briefly onto her covered porch, gesturing emphatically toward Daniel's property while speaking to the crew foreman. The man nodded repeatedly, his expression suggesting this was a well-rehearsed conversation. "Showtime," Daniel murmured, pressing record on his camera. The removal process began methodically, the larger snowblower creating massive arcs of snow as it cleared Marilyn's circular driveway, while the plow handled the wider areas. Then came the critical moment. The operator turned toward Daniel's property line, prepared to deposit what appeared to be several tons of snow. Daniel held his breath. In that moment, he wondered if he'd over-engineered the solution, if his calculations had accounted for this volume of snow, if the heating elements would maintain temperature under such an assault. The snow hit the property boundary and hesitated. There was no other word for it. Like water encountering an invisible dam, it seemed to pause before finding the path of least resistance, which happened to be the precisely engineered channels Daniel had created. Instead of forming the usual mountain across his driveway, the snow flowed in beautiful, almost liquid patterns, curving gracefully around his property's edge. Daniel let out a whoop of triumph as the snow completed its journey, forming an elegant crescent shape on Marilyn's side of the property line. The snowblower operator stopped, clearly confused. He climbed down from his cab, walking over to examine the snow's unusual behavior, testing it with his boot. Through the binoculars, Daniel could read the man's lips as he spoke into his radio. "Something weird is happening with the snow. It's not staying where we put it." The crew foreman joined him, both men now poking at the snow with increasing confusion. They attempted a second deposit with the same result. The snow simply refused to invade Daniel's property, instead redirecting itself into an ever-growing barrier on Marilyn's side. After several failed attempts, the crew foreman made a call, presumably to Marilyn, while gesturing wildly at the snow formation. Moments later, Marilyn's front door flew open, and she emerged fully into the snowstorm, not even bothering with her usual precisely tied scarf. Daniel zoomed in with his camera, capturing her expression as she surveyed the scene, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and dawning comprehension that she was witnessing something beyond her control. When she turned toward Daniel's house, her eyes narrowing as they fixed on his window, he didn't hide. Instead, he raised his coffee mug in a small toast, holding her gaze until she turned away to berate the helpless snow removal crew. The next snowfall came 3 days later, and with it, another meticulously orchestrated burial of Daniel's driveway. This time, he was prepared with his camera set to record the entire operation from multiple angles. As he reviewed the footage later that evening, he noticed something he'd missed before. Marilyn actually paid the snow removal crew extra. He could clearly see her handing over additional cash, with specific instructions for his property. Paying a premium for pettiness, Daniel muttered, shaking his head as he added the clip to his growing digital folder labeled Snow Wars. That weekend, Daniel invited a few colleagues from his architecture firm for a housewarming dinner. As they enjoyed wine in his newly furnished living room, the conversation inevitably turned to his neighbor troubles. "You should just report her to the city," suggested Eliza, his firm's legal consultant. "That's clearly a violation of municipal codes about snow disposal." Too direct, Daniel replied, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "She'd just find another way to make my life difficult. Besides, she's been here for decades. She's got connections." "What about a fence?" offered Marcus, a landscape architect he often collaborated with. "I could design something that would physically prevent snow from being pushed onto your property." "Check the HOA guidelines," Daniel sighed. "Fences in front yards are prohibited, and side yard fences require approval from the board, which he effectively controls." His colleagues continued offering well-intentioned suggestions, each running into the same problem. Marilyn had spent years building a system that worked in her favor. Any conventional solution would simply trigger another form of harassment. As his friends were leaving, Marcus lingered behind. "You know," he said quietly, "I worked on a project in New Hampshire with a similar issue. Rich neighbor kept diverting water runoff onto the adjacent property. We eventually designed a subtle grading solution that used their own water against them. Nothing visible, nothing that violated any codes, but extremely effective." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Tell me more." The next morning, fortified with coffee and professional curiosity, Daniel bundled up for a neighborhood reconnaissance mission, disguised as a friendly walk. Camera in hand, he documented the topography of the surrounding properties, paying careful attention to how snow accumulated naturally and how water would flow during the inevitable spring melt. His architect's eye noticed patterns that most would miss: the slight grade of the street, the direction gutters pointed, the subtle dips in certain lawns. Most crucially, he observed how Marilyn's property sat approximately 8 inches higher than his at their shared boundary, a feature she had been exploiting for her snow disposal strategy. Returning home, Daniel spread out property surveys across his dining table. A plan was forming, one that would require precision, discretion, and perhaps a dash of architect's revenge. His phone chimed with a neighborhood association email. The subject line made him snort. "Reminder: exterior holiday decorations must be removed by January 15th. The sender was, naturally, Marilyn Kensington. As if summoned by the digital mention, he glanced out his window to see Marilyn conducting what appeared to be an inspection of the street. Clipboard in hand, she made notes as she scrutinized each property, occasionally taking photos with her phone. When she reached Daniel's house, she spent notably longer, her gaze lingering on his roofline, windows, and the small wreath he still had hanging on his door. "Taking inventory of my crimes against suburban aesthetics?" Daniel murmured, watching as she photographed his vintage mid-century mailbox, one he'd specifically chosen for its architectural significance. His doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Daniel opened it to find a printed notice. "Violation on non-conforming mailbox design. Please reference Section 7.3 of Neighborhood Guidelines. Correction required within 30 days." The notice was unsigned, but the crisp paper and perfectly aligned text screamed Marilyn. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "As a new resident, your first violation is just a warning. That passive-aggressive smiley face was the final straw. Daniel pinned the notice to his refrigerator, next to the growing collection of evidence, and opened his laptop. He navigated to the city's building department website and began searching for permit requirements for landscape modifications. "Two can play at this game," he said to the empty room, cracking his knuckles before typing topographical water management solutions into his search bar. "And one of us designs award-winning buildings for a living." The thaw began in unexpected ways. 3 days after the snowpocalypse, Daniel received an email invitation to coffee from Barbara Fisher, the Neighborhood Association's treasurer. "Nothing formal," she wrote. "Just thought you might appreciate some context about Maple Hill." They met at a small cafe downtown, where Barbara, a retired high school principal with a no-nonsense demeanor, got straight to the point. "You've caused quite a stir," she said, stirring honey into her tea. "Nobody stood up to Marilyn successfully in years. Now half the neighborhood is wondering if you're available for consultation." Daniel chuckled. "I'm not looking to start a revolution." "Too late," Barbara replied with a wry smile. "The Hendersons are already asking about similar topographical adjustments for their property. And the Garcias want to know if you'd help them with a drainage issue that Marilyn's been using to control their backyard renovations." "I just wanted to protect my driveway," Daniel protested. Barbara's expression turned serious. "It's more than that. This neighborhood was something special before Marilyn took over. People used to collaborate on projects, help each other out. The rules were guidelines, not weapons." She paused. "Richard, Marilyn's husband, he understood that. He kept things balanced. Since he passed, she's been ruling by clipboard." As they talked, Daniel learned more about the Maple Hill that could be. Barbara shared photos from block parties 15 years ago, community garden projects, and collaborative snow removal efforts, where neighbors helped each other clear driveways after storms. "We're having board elections next month," Barbara mentioned casually as they were leaving. "Several positions are open. We could use someone with your perspective." Daniel returned home with thoughts swirling about community design beyond just buildings, how neighborhoods functioned as social ecosystems, how physical spaces influenced human interaction. That evening, his doorbell rang. When he opened it, he found Marilyn standing on his porch, straight-backed and formal. No clipboard in sight. "May I come in?" she asked. Her tone neither friendly nor hostile, something he hadn't heard from her before. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. Marilyn entered, taking in his home with a surveyor's eye. "You've done nice work with the original features," she said, surprising him with what sounded like a genuine compliment. "The Millers painted over the crown molding. I was glad to see you restored it." "Thank you," Daniel replied cautiously, offering her a seat in the living room. Marilyn didn't waste time once seated. "I know what you did with the snow. It was impressive." "Just protecting my property," Daniel replied. "No," she countered. "It was more than that. It was elegant. Richard would have appreciated it." A flicker of something, grief, perhaps, crossed her face before the composed mask returned. He was an engineer, always looking for the most efficient solution to any problem. She reached into her purse and withdrew a faded photograph. It showed a younger Marilyn standing beside a tall man with kind eyes, both of them in front of a newly planted tree. "This neighborhood was our project together. Every tree placement, every common area, we designed it all." Her voice carried none of its usual sharp edges. "After he died, maintaining his standards became everything." Daniel recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in colleagues who became so fixated on a designed element that they lost sight of the project's purpose. "Standards matter," he said carefully. "But so does adaptation. The best designs evolve." "Like your snow solution," she acknowledged. "Richard would have sketched something similar." She stood abruptly. "I've been speaking with Barbara. She thinks it's time for some new voices on the board." Daniel blinked, surprised at the sudden shift. "Are you endorsing me?" Marilyn almost smiled. "I'm acknowledging that persistence and creativity deserve recognition. Whether that translates to board membership is up to the neighborhood." At the door, she paused. "My snow removal service will be adjusting their approach. Your driveway won't be affected again." After she left, Daniel stood in his doorway, wondering if he'd imagined the entire interaction. His phone buzzed with a neighborhood-wide email from Marilyn announcing a spring planning committee for reimagining community spaces, with his name listed as co-chair. Tom texted moments later, "Did hell just freeze over? Marilyn voluntarily sharing power?" Daniel smiled, looking across at Marilyn's house, where she was meticulously brushing snow from her prized evergreen shrubs. The art of resolution, he was discovering, sometimes required more subtlety than the conflict itself. In architecture and in neighborhoods, the most elegant solutions weren't about winning battles, but building something better together.